constantly evolving. As time moves forward, things change, which is why it's important to stay informed. Throughout the year, there are dozens of professionals that share their expertise with the community through lectures sponsored by local government agencies and area not-for-profits. And each month, SLC TV will feature one of these visiting professors as they discuss the latest current events. So grab a notebook and pull up a chair, because the lecture hall is about to begin.
And I'm very pleased to have been invited by the Kilmer Branch Library here to give a presentation to you on the artistic legacy of A.E. Backus as part of the series of presentations that are being offered, community presentations right here at the library on the arts. So I'm very pleased to be here with you. I'll be giving a little presentation and talking as we go along. If you have any questions, I'm going to try to set aside some time at the end for us to have a conversation if you like. And I'll do my best to answer any questions that you have. Should remind you though, and I'll remind you several times during the course, is that today the museum is open and there's a lot going on at the museum, and I want to make sure that you're aware of some of those things because it's possible you might want to skip over to the museum right after this to see a few things that are going to be concluding in a very short period of time. It'll be your last chance even to see a few things. I'll make sure you are well aware of those before we're done. Okay? Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. That's what I needed. Okay. So I'll also start by mentioning, I don't know many of you here. I'm brand new at the museum. I've been the executive director since the end of September. And so I'm the new guy. And I'm still learning a lot about A.E. Backus and some of the details. It's possible you will stump the speaker by asking me a tough question at the end, and that's okay. I can take it, but I'll try to find out the answer for you if I don't know the answer, okay? So it's my pleasure to share with you, when Amanda was describing to me what she was imagining these lecture programs to be, and how A.E. Backus is such an important part of the history of Fort Pierce, how that connection could really kind of resonate with audiences as it has for so many years, and as I'm learning and excited about at the museum and the work that I do with those stories here in the community. Backus has a history of being known as a great artist, but he was also viewed himself as a humanitarian. And many people knew him first for that here locally. And it's an important part of the legacy that the museum seeks to promote and preserve and to kind of live as a model going forward. And I'm excited to be able to tell you a little bit about the art and also about his connection to the community and how he helped support the arts in the community through his own work. A little of the things we'll talk about today. So I'm going to kind of begin at the beginning with some of the history and stories about how Backus found himself here. Backus was born here in Fort Pierce in 1906. And as such, we like to think of him as Florida's own original landscape painter. That is, at that time, at the beginning of the last century, there were plenty of artists who were painting in Florida, but they were often not Florida natives. They were artists from the Northeast who were taking the Flagler Railroad down here in the wintertime. Maybe you've heard of that pattern before. And enjoying Florida in the winter and painting Florida in the winter. And then they were leaving and going home. There were no kind of homegrown artists yet in the relatively young state of Florida. And so the paintings that exist of Florida in the late 1800s and the early 1900s are often painted by those seasonal artists, and they were here only painting at a certain time of year. And so capturing only Florida at that time of year in the winter and really missing the nuances of the different seasons and things that were in bloom and things that change. Backus was really the first artist to do that and to make a living doing that as a native Floridian. So we're very proud that he was born here in Fort Pierce for the city as well as here in the state for his regional renown. He was the son of pioneers. At that time, there were individuals who were living up in the Northeast who were looking for ways to make a name, make a living. And Florida was a freshly opened frontier full of opportunities. Backus's father decided that he was going to try to seize one of those opportunities, and he decided to come down from the Northeast and to take up pineapple farming, which was the kind of farming in this area that the land and the climate was well suited for. He thought that was a great idea. He didn't know anything about pineapple farming, but he thought it'd be a great idea, wouldn't it? And it's that kind of can-do attitude for pioneers that sometimes can make things happen. So he moved down here to try his hand at that. He came down solo, leaving his wife and his young family up until he could get things kind of established. In 1902, his mother, Josephine, arrived in Fort Pierce. She came by steamboat, and she landed at what we think of now as Cobb's Landing. And here's a painting that Backus did of the landing in 1960, so 58 years after his mother arrived. But you can imagine what it was like back then. The story that I've been told is that Backus's father lured his mother down to the promise of a wonderful community, great weather, climate was mild and fun, and he was riding her in the winter. And when she got here, it was in the summer. And some of you may know that the early name of the county here, when it was what is now multiple counties, was Mosquito County. A very evocative name for a reason, as you can imagine. So she was not expecting that, and the story is that when she arrived here and ended up on the dock, she only stayed here for a month. And then she packed up and went back and said, "This is not going to work." But he wooed her down in the next season, and she did finally move and with the kids and set up their home here. And it was here in 1906 that Backus was born. So I kind of alluded to the idea that the elder Backus did not know anything about pineapple farming. He was trying to figure it out on the fly. He was hiring and importing workers from the Bahamas who had experience in farming pineapples. But the economy was going down here in Florida because pineapples were being produced more cheaply elsewhere, and he could not adapt quickly enough, and it didn't work out so well. So he had to transition into a new business, and what else could you imagine to do here in Paradise but perhaps be involved in boating? And so he started a boat building business, whose physical site was actually kind of where the museum's parking lot is now. If you are familiar with where the museum is on North Indian River Drive, just down that way, our neighbors in the parking lot, the Manatee Observation Center, was about where that is physically, is where the Backus Boat Works was, and where Backus spent a lot of time as a kid and as a young man working for his father. And here's a scene that Backus painted from an old sketch that he did in 1945. He painted this in 1980, referring to that old sketch of how he remembered it being back in those early days. Now, Backus, when he was born born as a sickly child, they describe. In fact, his doctor did not think he was going to live very long. And he was very small when he was born. And the story is that that's how he got his nickname, Bean. because his godfather, his Uncle Reg, took one look at him and said, well, he's no bigger than a little bean. So his family was renowned for having nicknames for everybody, so Bean became the nickname that stuck. And he had a couple of varieties of that, variations of that nickname, Bean Pot when he was a little kid, and sometimes Beanie when he was older. But Bean is, of the nicknames, Bean was the one that he preferred. And as that sickly child, he was his mother was advised not to send him to school right off because they were afraid he was too weak to be able to stand roughhousing play and the uncontrolled environment of being with other kids, with others, with coughs and colds and things like that. So it was kind of a sheltered life that he lived at home. And to pass the time for him, somebody gave him a little tin of watercolors, like you would give a child to enjoy, like we would think of, I guess, a box of crayons maybe now or something. And that was something that really kind of activated a hidden talent for him. And he began painting all the time. This is the earliest painting that we know of that has survived, that he painted in, we think, 1918 when he was 12 years old. It's actually on view in the museum right now. I don't know what you were doing at age 12, but this is a very detailed landscape with some very nuanced and subtle lighting that you would expect from an artist so young. He always wanted to be an artist. A great quote that we have of his: "I don't paint just because I like to paint. I paint because I must paint." This is another early landscape that he did at age 14. They always say for writers and artists that you should write or paint what you know best. And growing up here, he knew the Florida landscape. And of course, it became kind of his calling card later and throughout his life. This painting has an interesting story. It has a funny signature on it, different from the rest of his. He didn't go by his given name, A.E. or Albert Ernest Bacchus, because who wants to be called Albert? Who wants to be called Ernest? Bean was better. But there was a lady who lived in the neighborhood who, when he was old enough to go to school and would come home after school, she would always, the story is, would have some apple pie for him after school. And he said that one day he would repay her when he was a good enough painter. And so a few years later, he painted this, but he signed it Albert Backus because that's how she knew him. She didn't refer to him as by the nickname. She referred to him by his given name, even though no one called him that. So he signed it so that she would know it was from him. And this is also on display at the museum right now.
The top part looks like it's a print. Top left.
It has some, it might remind you of a print because it looks like it's been kind of, kind of worked in a little bit. These are brush strokes that you can actually see on the canvas. They're not fully kind of realized, so you can really see where the artist's hand was in this particular work. And it does have that kind of quality of a print, almost. This is oil paint, I believe. This is oil paint. So as he got a little older, he was trying to paint as many things as he could. He was beginning to experiment with the idea, explore the idea that maybe art could be something that he could do as a living. He had no models for what a fine artist was, what we would think of as a painter who only paints paintings of people or paintings of landscapes. So he was trying to think of what the commercial applications were, the real job applications of being an artist. And there was a lot of real estate development that was trying to happen here during that time as well. And he was trying to parlay some of his skills, his imaginative skills, to help in that industry. And so he did this aerial view for real estate developers. It is probably unlikely that at age 16 he was up in a plane looking down. It was probably that he was imagining what this might look like from that distance. And so he was trying to see if he could find a practical application for those skills. They say he would paint whatever he could, whenever he could. And he had a dream of perhaps going into the sign painting business, another commercial application. And in so doing, when he was in high school, he had heard that there was a great school in New York City, an art school, that people would go to learn specific skills. And so he asked his Uncle Reg if he could front him some money to spend the summer, a summer semester in New York City at what we think of now as the Parsons School of Art and Design, to learn and get formal training in art. And his Uncle Reg said, sure, that would be great. This was before the stock market crash. And so he went up there for a semester, learned all he could, and came home to keep working on high school, and then decided he wanted to go up the next semester, next summer. And his Uncle Reg said, I can do it for you again, but this will be the last one, because this is just before the economic crisis, the Great Depression. And Florida, for those of you who know a little bit of the history, Florida was already kind of going down before the stock market crash, and Uncle Reg's business was failing as well. So he said, this is the last time I'll be able to do it. From then on, you'll have to do it yourself. And Bacchus said, well, I'll be sure that I pay you back. And Uncle Reg said something really important to him that kind of shaped really his philosophy for the rest of his life. Uncle Reg told him to pass it on. Don't pay me back, pass it on. And that really stuck with him. That was an important kind of thing. That wasn't a transactional thing. You give me some money or give me an opportunity to do something and I'll pay you back. No, pay it forward. Pass it on. It's something that enabled him to pursue that dream of being an artist, and something that he would incorporate into his own personal philosophy and be able to share as a legacy with others, as we'll see. So he did that last semester, that last summer opportunity at Parsons in New York, came back. The economy was going so poorly that he realized he couldn't finish high school and had to stop what he was doing and start working immediately. Started doing some of those practical applications like painting signs and things like that. But one of the things that he was fortunate enough to do is to get a job at what we think of now as the Sunrise Theater right here in Fort Pierce. He was a projectionist at the Sunrise Theater, then owned by the Kobelgard family, as part of a chain of four, what we would think of as a chain of 4 different theaters stretching from Cocoa Beach all the way down to Stewart. And Mr. Kobelgard realized that young Bean Backus was a ringer, that he was a good projectionist, sure, but he was also a good artist, and he could use that to great effect. And so one of the ways that he did that was he allowed Backus to use the projection booth as a studio, and could use in his own time, paint up there what he wanted to, as long as he kept up his duties being a projectionist, but also painting some of the marquee posters that would advertise the films that were being shown. The Bahamian workers were all African American. They were all from the African diaspora. They were brought in as slaves to work the plantations in the Bahamas, and now they were free, but they were still working and were brought in to work here while the economy provided it. And they brought their families. And so Bean, who was not allowed in his earliest years to go to school, had to stay home. And his playmates were the kids from the plantation, the African American kids. And he didn't know any different, which was great. So he grew up in what we would perhaps think of now as an inclusive home environment that was very atypical, very different from what was happening in other parts of this town, of this state, and even the country. But it was normal for him. Another aspect of that kind of diverse upbringing is that his mother befriended the Seminole Indians who would come into town from Okeechobee on a weekly basis for supplies. She would befriend them, and she actually took it upon herself to assist them in some of their transactions at the general stores and when they were buying supplies, because due to the discrimination rampant in those days, the store owners would often try to cheat the Seminole Indians who didn't fully appreciate how financial transactions worked. And so if they were paying for a pound of sugar, they might not realize that they were only getting 3/4 of a pound or a half a pound. Josephine Backus thought that was atrocious and intolerable. And so the story is that she would kind of show up on Saturdays on that trading day and be in the store when those things happened, and she would keep her eye open. And if a store person was trying to cheat the Seminoles, that she would throw down a flag on the field and say, you can't do that, that's not right. Probably didn't give her a great reputation among some of the store owners, but the Seminoles deeply appreciated it. And so Bean was exposed to their culture as well, and they show up as subjects and as imagery in many of his paintings throughout his life. Just a few different examples here. So among that diverse upbringing, he was comfortable working with kind of the VIP important people, the politicos of the day when as he became an established artist. This is Claude Pepper when he was in Congress in the 40s, late 40s, early 50s. And he was used to kind of being comfortable with those kinds of audiences and having no problem as an artist. And here in Fort Pierce, he was also comfortable with other audiences too. When at a time of segregation, he was very comfortable crossing the tracks. And people understood who he was and what he stood for, and that was okay. He was arrested many times for crossing those racial lines, for going to the old Flamingo to hear jazz performed in the black clubs, because you weren't allowed to do that back in those days if you were white. But Bacchus was arrested several times for breaking those social norms, and he kept doing it because he didn't understand why that should be the case. So let's fast forward just a couple of years to the 50s, to the mid and late 50s. An example of his open door policy in his studio. Everyone in town knew that where a good time could be had and good conversation, and if you were interested in art, it was the best place to visit. And there was a teacher at Lincoln Park Academy, the traditional African-American school here during segregated times, Zenobia Jefferson. She was originally from New York and had come down here. And she had heard and knew Bacchus and understood that he was very open and was interested in helping anyone who had an interest in art. And he had told Mrs. Jefferson that if she had any promising high school students who were looking for more artistic training beyond what she was offering, to send them her way, his way, and she did. She sent a young man by the name of Alfred Hare, who was one of her students, to connect with Bacchus, and Bacchus took a liking to him immediately. He was very talented, very charismatic, and he swiftly became an apprentice and studio manager for Bacchus as he graduated high school. And he began to realize that there was something, there was a career path for him as well. He is the kind of one of the beginnings of the movement that we think of now as the Florida Highwaymen, which you may have heard of in past lectures here and may be aware of from your Fort Pierce stories as well. The Florida Highwaymen were a loose collective of African-American artists who were interested in painting the landscape and making a living painting the landscape by selling paintings to people, as many people as they could, anywhere they could. They get their name kind of after the fact by their practice, their innovative practice of taking all the paintings that they could paint and putting them in a car and driving wherever they thought the market was and selling them directly through themselves, not through a gallery or through a museum or through some middleman. They realized that they could do it themselves and reap all the benefits. The way that the story, the way that these ideas came about is several parallel tracks. There was a somewhat established artist named Harold Newton who had moved back to Florida in the mid-50s and sought Bacchus out to ask his opinion and critique some of his work and to learn from what he was doing. And since Bacchus had the reputation of having an open studio door, Harold Newton was welcome and came to visit. And the stories are that, that Harold Newton saw the kinds of painting that Bacchus was doing. He was painting the Florida landscape. He was using a palette knife, which is a little different from a brush at the time, and was applying paint in a different way that, that Newton had not seen before or seen done that way. And he was very encouraging and would share supplies when he could and advice when he could. And Newton took those things and said, I can figure this out, I can do this. He was already a gifted artist. He had been selling his own work before, but he realized that this was a great way to, this was a great subject, these landscapes that seem to be so popular. If he paints these landscapes, if he goes door to door or makes calls to doctors' offices or lawyers' offices or dentists' offices, anywhere that has waiting rooms or wall spaces that would benefit from beautiful paintings, that you could make a living that way. So Harold Newton starts kind of doing that kind of a thing. And then Alfred Hare, as a young man, as the high school student, connects with Bacchus, actually takes lessons from Bacchus, and because of his youth and the connection with his teacher, Mrs. Jefferson, and realizes that, and is aware, no doubt, of Harold Newton and what he's doing, realizes, my job options are either to work, do hard manual labor, outside probably, in the groves, or I can be entrepreneurial. I can take charge myself and come up with my own path. And so, using what he learned from Bacchus, he started kind of innovating this idea of making these paintings. And he realized that, gee, established artist A.E. Bacchus might spend weeks making a painting and sell it for $250. But if I spend a few days and make 25 paintings and sell them for $10 each, then I can make the same amount of money in less time. So he realized that there was some innovation that could happen there too. So he began to kind of put his mind to working as fast as he could to create as many paintings as he could. And then he got his friends involved, realizing this is a thing. People are buying these paintings. We need more of these. This would be great. This is a way for us to be in charge, to be our own boss, and to do our own thing. And so he went forward with these ideas with his friends and with others to become the Florida Highwaymen and to do this with Bacchus's blessing, with his help, with his understanding. So we think of it as fast painting. That idea of working in oil allows you to work very fast and to come up with a style. You can see there's not necessarily a lot of detail here, but there's the suggestion of detail. Very much, in the way that Bacchus was learning about Monet and the suggestion of impressionistic detail. Alfred Hare, Harold Newton, Al Black, all of the other highwaymen were seeing that and realizing, yes, we can go fast, careful, but fast, and suggest the details that your eyes are going to fill in anyway and make it go and have more paintings at the end of the day, so to speak, to sell. Another great one, you can see kind of really the energy from Alfred Hare here. And the other innovation, I think, is that they were welcomed and they were actively looking over Bacchus's shoulder as a window into the market to see, gee, the old man is painting these scenes and they're popular. So if we paint these scenes, they must be popular too. So even though Bacchus was not going anywhere near as fast as they were able to kind of look over his shoulder and say, poinciana trees. These are going well. We should paint a bunch of poinciana trees. And kind of the genius of the Highwayman's model, if you will, is that they were also so responsive to the marketplace. Is that where Bacchus was taking weeks, maybe months sometimes, to paint paintings for a built-in market who was waiting for them, the Highwaymen were going out that day with the paintings that they'd done maybe even as recently as yesterday, and the paint might still be wet, and they're selling them. And if at the end of the day this scene didn't sell, that was a note to them to realize, wait a second, we need to change the product. We should paint a different kind of scene tomorrow because this scene didn't sell well today. So they were immediately responsive to the marketplace, which gave them kind of an agility, a nimbleness, if you think of it in business terms, to be able to respond to that marketplace to paint what people wanted. And that's one of the secrets to their success too, and why they were able to paint so much and for so long, is that they weren't just kind of locked into painting the same thing over and over again. Even though they were painting multiples of many things, they were able to move back and forth to what would work well. So perhaps you get the sense of what Uncle Reg told Bacchus those years ago and how he had added it to his own philosophy of passing it on. He was happy to work with the Highwaymen or with anybody who was interested in learning about art and finding their own way as an artist, just as Uncle Reg had helped him. So fast forward to 2004, when Alfred Hare and the Florida Highwaymen, the original 26 Highwaymen, were all inducted into the Florida Artists Hall of Fame in 2004 as a direct result of the learning that they received from Bacchus and their great experience and work that they did after that.
Is there a woman on the end?
There is a woman on the end. Thank you for mentioning that. We call them the Florida Highwaymen, but there was one woman in the official 26, Mary Ann Carroll, still with us today. She is right there at the end. She was a neighbor of several of the Highwaymen, of Harold Newton and others, and she was looking at them coming home every day, leaving every morning with all these paintings in their cars, and coming back with these wads of money, going, look what we did today. And she's like, I think I could do that. And turns out she could. She was quite good at it. She learned from them. When we call them like a collective, that means that they were sharing with each other. They were competing with each other. You know, who's got the biggest wad of money at the end of the day means you're the best artist or the best salesman. And there was a lot of, you know, that kind of competitive, good-natured competitive value. But they were also sharing with each other as well, and they were learning from each other. And so
Hare's widow, who's still alive, claims she was one of the ones.
That's right. Doretha Hare Truesdale tells those stories also. Yes, absolutely. So, but she is not in the original 26, but she certainly was there at the very beginning and participated in lots of different ways. They were not the only artists who were connected with Bacchus and are part of this legacy for Fort Pierce. There are, in addition to those 26 artists who are in the Florida Hall of Fame connected with Bacchus, there are two others as well. James Hutchinson, who was inducted in 2011, still with us, a very gifted artist. He was the brother-in-law, ended up being the brother-in-law of Bacchus. Bacchus had married his sister in the 1950s. And you can see his painting down there at the bottom, very similar in the kind of landscape view that he learned from Bacchus, and also Hutchinson spent a lot of time on the Seminole in the Seminole tribes reservation areas and learning directly from them and using what he learned to paint these very sympathetic and evocative portraits of the Seminoles as well. And a woman, Jacqueline Bryce, Jackie Bryce, also learning from Backus' studio. You can see a picture of her right there with him. And she was inducted the very next year in 2012. So Backus has kind of a unique position in the state as not only being a great artist, not only being what we think of as the dean of Florida landscape, but he was also not only as an artist in his own right, but also kind of a pathway to helping other artists find their way and to succeed as well. This is an image of Backus standing on the doorstep of the new studio, his home from the end of the 1950s until his death in 1990. And there's the door that is open. It was always open, literally. And this house still exists today. If you're familiar with it, it's at 122 Avenue C, now Backus Avenue. It's now the home and headquarters of Main Street Fort Pierce. That spent a lot of time and love and effort in restoring the home. And you can go and visit it today. And here's a painting that was painted after Backus' death by another artist, Paul Arsenault, showing that, that door open as a metaphor and symbol for Backus' open philosophy in nature. So kind of in closing, I have a few archival images of Backus here at work, having a good time. Looks like he's talking with his brush, doesn't it? Right there. And a great photo in the last years of his life here. I think it appeared in the Palm Beach Post. And of course some great landscape scenes. You know, he started off, as we saw in some of those earlier ones, very impressionistic, working with a palette knife. But as he got older, he became a little more careful and precise, perhaps responding to the market, perhaps going a little slower and realizing that that detail was more careful and important to him. A great quote, "Talent is a gift. It's what we do with our talent that matters." So you can't just live by your talent, it's what you do with it. And oh, a great photo here, I forgot about this one, that shows the palette knife in his hand, actually. You can see right there him painting on site outside. He knew great financial success in his lifetime, but he died penniless. Kind of that pass it on idea. He had about 5,000 paintings, we think, over his 70-year career. And he died in 1990 with a 4-year waiting list for commissions. He gave all of his money away. And those 28 artists trace their induction into the Hall of Fame and their careers and livelihoods for their connections with Backus. So that legacy that I started off describing as central to the preservation and promotion of the museum that bears his name, it continues. This is a painting that Backus painted of the original Fort Pierce Art Gallery, which was founded in 1960 when he was still alive, and he was intimately involved in the launch and the upkeep of that gallery. It was in that space where the current museum is now, where the very first Highwayman exhibition was ever held, organized by Backus in the 70s. And the building has changed several times in its lifetime. You can see a little bit on the outside there, that painting, that the original idea, the original plan, was for paintings to be outside the building, not inside. It was an open air. That doesn't work so well with hurricanes and storms, as you well know. Now it's all on the inside, you'll be pleased to know. And after our recent expansion in 2016, the outside looks a little more like this. with a very handsome display outside, a marquee, electronic marquee sign with artwork there by Pat Cochran, those large sable palm trees, we call them the sable sentinels, holding the sign there that says A.E. Backus Museum and Gallery. And then outside, a beautiful canopy system outside for outdoor seating and activities like this that happened. I think this was a photo from the museum's grand opening celebration in 2016. So you can see it's gotten a long way from those early humble beginnings, but it's allowed us to continue preserving that legacy. The legacy continues. We're very proud of a recent book that was published, a work of scholarship, of art history scholarship, by Natasha Kuzmanovic, called Tropical Light, The Art of A.E. Backus. It's the first kind of big scholarly coffee table book that focuses on Backus as an artist. It also discusses the highwayman and his patrons and many other details that were central to his story and his appreciation that allows us to share this far and wide with audiences all over the world now. And this book last year, 2017, won the Florida Book Award for books published here in Florida, which we were very pleased to learn. Now, I told you that there's some things going on at the museum that you've got to know about. Today, March 8th, is the last day of this special exhibition, which has been up and we've been very pleased to have since January, Blazing the Trail, Vintage Paintings by the Original Highwaymen. We have on permanent display examples of highwayman art as part of the legacy that we're carrying forward of Backus's work, but every year we try to do a special exhibition that expands that goes beyond that. And today's the last day for that. So between now and 4 o'clock, if you haven't seen that show, you want to pop over there to see it because that's great. It shows 5 of the original highwaymen's works, Harold Newton, Alfred Hare, Willie Daniels, R.A. McClendon, and also Marion Carroll's work. There's one work of hers in there as well. So it's an excellent opportunity to see a lot of really fine works from private collections on display all at once. We had great feedback about this show. If you haven't seen it, it's really a treat, and you should see it before the end of the day today. Starting next week, a week from today, yikes, will be the next exhibition. It's our annual photography exhibition called Through the Eye of the Camera. It's a juried show. If you are a photographer and want to have your work in the museum, you should enter this competition. The last day to enter is this Saturday. There's an application form right there on the table if you're interested or you know someone who's interested. But it's a juried show, so you have an opportunity perhaps to be shown along with these other artists, many of them local, but not all of them local, who prioritize the museum as a great place to show works of art. So we kind of like to take this kind of juried show idea as a way to keep the legacy going of encouraging other artists, just like Backus encouraged artists to find their path and to find their way and to share their art with our community and with others. Last quote I'll leave you with is one of the best for our topic today. I'd rather be known as a great humanitarian than the world's greatest painter. That was really important to him. Art was his entire career. It was his life. You would think that that's what he would want to be remembered for. But that was not what he wanted to be remembered for. It was much more important to be remembered and to be used as an example for what we can learn today and what we can do today in our own lives, is to pass that on, is to pass it forward. And that's what he wanted to live, and that's one of the things that we at the museum are proud to be doing every day. The story remains unfinished, just like this final painting, which is on display at the museum, that was on his easel the day he died in 1990. We can all finish this painting. We can all carry this forward, these ideals forward. It all has to start with just one person, just like it did with Bean. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your attention.